This is Greg Gust with the National Weather Service in Grand Forks, providing a mid-February update to the 2017 Spring Flood Outlook. This is prepared specifically for the River of the North and Devil's Lake basins. Looking at the main conditions here, there is an early thaw underway as we speak and will continue into early next week. This has somewhat reduced the overall flood risk, but mainly in the southern part of the Red River Valley. The flood risk does remain quite high. It's high across the northern part of the valley and highest in the Devil's Lake Basin and the northeast North Dakota tributaries. This graphic just shows those areas where major flooding is expected in far northeast North Dakota, moderate through the northern parts of the valley into the central parts, and then minor across the southern parts of the valley. This is based on the 50% or higher risk category in the probabilities, which we'll discuss here later. First of all, we'll overview the current conditions and describe the basis that leads to this outlook, with some flood risk examples shown here later. Right now, soil moisture is quite high. This graphic shows the analysis done by our Climate Prediction Center through various soil levels, but showing pretty much the entire basin at 90% or greater for its historical soil moisture rankings, and a large part of the area at 95 to 99% of historical rankings. Much of this, again, can be related to late fall precipitation across the valley, pretty much an inch to 3 inches above normal precipitation since October 1st till now, with 2 to 3 inches above normal, mainly across the southern part of the valley. Looking a little earlier, though, in the year, we would notice that summer into early fall, there was exceptionally heavy precipitation across the northern part of the valley. Extreme northeast North Dakota into northwest Minnesota at areas of 8 to 12 inches above normal. So that, again, is part of our concern. That brings us to base stream flows, which for this time of the year are quite high. And most of eastern North Dakota, most of northwest Minnesota are showing up at 90% or greater of the typical type of stream flow you would expect at this time of the year. That relates to other type of high precipitation years with very wet falls. Here's an example from the 2011 period in February, also showing that high type of stream flow base. Here's an example from the Park River at Grafton, just showing throughout the course of the year in 2016 how the volume of flow has increased. The green and tan shades are the historically lesser amounts of flow. The bluish and dark blue are the historically higher flows, and the black line for the stream flow itself showing how in the March, May, July period that ramped up flows in the Park River, and as we went into the fall, now going into that 90 percentile or greater of historical flows, and ending at freeze up right near the record type of flow. In the southern part of the basin, this is the Buffalo River at Hawley, and a similar type of map showing through 2016 that, again, drier conditions, and those persisted longer in the southern basin, with heavier rains not starting until July, and then the flows kicking in from that point on, so that as we get into November, December, and even into January and February now, that last red dot showing up in early February was a measurement taken that shows it is still above the 95th percentile for flows for this time of the year. Frost depths in general across the area, 12 to 24 inches. There is somewhat shallower frost depth in the northern part of the basin where deep and early snow help to insulate the soils, so not quite as hard frozen in some areas. In the southern part of the basin, there's actually a very deep frost, greater than 20 inches across most of that area. And though over the next few days that top very layer of soil will thaw, it's still a deep frost below that, so that should all refreeze again. Speaking of fall precipitation and snow cover in particular, the accumulated snowfall from October 1st till now shows that the southern basin actually was very near normal snowfall amounts, but because of warmer temperatures, a lot of that has melted. Meanwhile, in the northern part of the valley, northwest Minnesota, and across much of central and northeast North Dakota, very heavy snowfall still persists. And with that, 150 to 175% or greater of the typical snowfall showing up in far northwest Minnesota, and 200% or greater showing up across a large part of central North Dakota. So that higher than normal snowfall can affect the Red River flows on the Park River, the Upper Pembina, the Upper Cheyenne, Basin, those tributaries bringing that water into the Red River. Devil's Lake Basin going to have much above normal flow. And then elsewhere across the northern part of the Red River Basin, overall larger flows coming into the northern part of the basin, into Grand Forks and points north. Here's showing the snow cover. This was taken as a visible satellite imagery on Wednesday afternoon about 3:30 in the afternoon, and just showing the white as being the snow-covered landscape and the dark being that area that is largely snow-free on the South Basin. So again, as of yesterday afternoon, very little, if any, snow cover in the southern part of the basin south of Halstead. But there's also some areas showing up darker in the Minnesota, north central Minnesota, that are basically a result of forests and tree cover. So there's still snow cover under that tree, just to show you the difference. And then, of course, the northern part of the valley and across into northeast North Dakota, into central North Dakota, a very extensive snowpack. Here's a snowpack analysis produced by our National Operational Hydrologic Remote Sensing Group. And with that, a large area of 18 to 28 inches of snow across central North Dakota into the Devil's Lake Basin, 12 to 24 inches of snow showing up across the northern part of the Red River Basin itself. Here in Grand Forks, we measured 7 inches of snow yesterday, a little less to the west of us, but more as we move eastward toward Crookston and Fosston areas. South of Halstead and into the Fargo area, snowfall drops off rapidly to trace amounts or less south of Fargo. The snow water, the water content within that snowpack also is quite variable, with highest amounts in the Devil's Lake Basin of 3.5, 4, 5, some areas pushing 6 inches of water in the snowpack. Across the north part of the basin, 3 to 4 inches of water in that snowpack. Right here at Grand Forks, even with only 7 inches of snow, we're measuring 2.2 inches of water in that snow. And then as we get down to Fargo and south, of course, less than an inch in any of that remaining snowpack. Again, the flood risk by category. So moderate to major flooding expected in the northern part of the basin, major flooding across the Devil's Lake Basin up into northeast North Dakota and far northwest Minnesota. Looking at the southern part of the basin again, this is the Red River coming into Fargo and Moorhead. So these are the probability distribution showing up here, with blue being the historical record of flooding and the black lines being the conditional simulation based on current conditions. And so you can see we're very close to historical levels, with minor flooding and some low-end moderate flooding possible in the southern part of the basin. The Cheyenne River coming from the Upper Cheyenne and into Bald Hill Dam and Lake Ashtabula Reservoir, there's much above normal snowpack up in that area in the Upper Cheyenne. As that comes into the Cheyenne River and comes into Lake Ashtabula, a lot of that should be captured and metered through Bald Hill Dam. So below there at Valley City and points below that, where there is not appreciable snowpack left, that should help to temper any effects from that. So at Valley City itself and points downstream from there, we're expecting only, again, minor to low-end moderate flooding possible. Back up to the Red River system, moving up through Grand Forks and onto Oslo, that's where you're going to see those larger flows starting to move in from tributaries. So we start to see that moderate flood risk pushing up toward the major line at the 50% category and 40% category here at Oslo. The Grafton, Park River coming into Grafton, has a huge amount of water to move through those three branches of the Park River. And so with that, there's quite the possibility of exceeding flood of record at Grafton. So again, that's a very dramatic type of possibility, so something that will have to be closely watched and prepared for through the spring season. The Pembina River at Netchie can also see an appreciable amount of inflow, not so much coming out of Canada to Walhalla, but moving across Pembina County and into the Pembina River at Netchie and downstream from there toward Pembina itself. The two rivers at Hallock coming in on northwest Minnesota, that also should carry a fair amount of water, so looking at moderate to low and major flooding possible in that river system. And then again, those coming into the Red River between Drayton and Oslo, Drayton, and up toward Pembina, we expect to see the risk for major flooding now at the Red River at Pembina, crossing into Canada. Moving over to the Devil's Lake system at Creel Bay, major flooding expected throughout that area. Again, those blue circles and the line indicate historically what has occurred. So that very highest blue dot showing up on the far right represents the record inflows produced during 2009 with 677,000 acre-feet of inflow during that time period. The black represents the simulations given the current conditions and vetted against those different years. So with that, we see in general the current conditions are much worse than we'd expect at this. We have very wet conditions from last summer and fall and near record snowpack. But for water year 2009, that very high inflow that occurred given these current conditions and the subsequent spring could actually produce somewhat lesser inflows than we saw in the 2009 year. In 2011, where only 518,000 acre-feet of inflow occurred, so somewhat lesser, the current conditions vetted against what occurred in 2011 could actually produce higher runoff. So that's where our current conditions don't necessarily correspond directly with those points as you see them. For instance, the very highest black dot on there, that would be if we had a 2004 type spring with heavy rain, 2, 3, 4 inches of rainfall occurring in late March of 2004, given the current conditions, that could produce near a record runoff over 1 million acre-feet of water. So again, right now we're expecting 650,000 acre-feet of flow, which is still very near record runoff, with that producing a range from 1453.3 to 1454.3 feet for the resultant rise on Devil's Lake. Flood of record is currently at 1454.3, so coming in just under that. Here's a different look at it. We're currently at 1450.17 feet at Devil's Lake. The natural overflow starts to occur at 1458 feet. Permanent flood protection is in place for the communities and the critical infrastructure around that lake. However, there would still be widespread farmland flooding and overland flooding as a result of this. And most of that inflow would be expected during that late April into May time period, where each week you could see the lake rising as much as half a foot or more. But as you get into June, the first or second week of June, you generally tend to see the lake levels peak, and then evaporation starts to take place. So the most likely range is bringing that just under the flood of record, but we do have that possibility at a 20-25% chance or less of exceeding that flood of record. So that's something to bear in mind. Again, the flood risk by category. So what's going to happen next? Well, of course, we have a mild weekend ahead with very warm temperatures. Next Monday morning, we're actually expecting widespread light rain across the area. Along the Canadian border, we could see a mix of rain and snow, but we could see as much of 1/4 of an inch of rain across the area, maybe 1/2 an inch or more across the far northern part of the basin and up into north central Minnesota. Elsewhere, very wet along the west coast and wet across the southern U.S. Here's the 7-day precipitation forecast for the period from the 16th all the way to the 23rd, so from basically today into middle part of next week. 1/4 of an inch or more again possible on Monday, with snow possible again later in the week across the area. We should see warm temperatures through Monday, Tuesday, and the low temperature at night at or above freezing in many locales. So that'll again get a lot of melting occurring, especially in the southern part of the basin, and water starting to flow in those rivers. So we expect to see water flowing in the southern tributaries and some approach to possibly minor flooding already starting to occur by Monday in some of those tributaries and as far north as Fargo early next week. But the Red River itself and most of the tributaries from there north should stay iced over, should see some water on top of the ice, and all of this should freeze up once again later in the week. Strong, wet systems, though, will continue to move across the continent of the United States, tracking generally from western U.S. into the southern U.S. At some point this year, we should see those patterns start to move closer up to the northern plains and start to get more significant precipitation in this area. But for now, mild conditions. And that's mild conditions through the middle part of next week. Looking at the 6 to 10 day outlook, we see the mild conditions shifting steadily into the Great Lakes, the rainy conditions tending towards snow here later in the week. And then from the end of February into early March, we expect things to cool down, with that wet signal persisting, but mainly the cooler and wetter conditions across Montana into the Dakotas. For March, April, May period, start to see the trending to near normal temperatures, but with a signal still persisting for near to above normal precipitation. To recap, early thaw underway, continuing into next week. Overall flood risk lowering, especially in the southern valley, due to runoff beginning and moving into the river systems now. The flood risk does remain quite high, especially high in the North Valley and highest in the Devil's Lake and northeast North Dakota tributaries. Thank you for listening to this. Our next update will be issued on the 2nd of March, 2017. This has been Greg Gust for the National Weather Service in Grand Forks.